They were already preparing the press release when the monitors began to flatten, the kind of silence that lands like a verdict. In the bright, unforgiving daylight of a glass and steel hospital wing, the most powerful woman in the city lay fading, and the doctors exchanged looks that said what words could not. They thought the CEO wouldn't survive. The board thought it was over. The city thought it would lose its iron spine. No one imagined that the one thing that would save her life would arrive in worn sneakers, carrying a child's backpack, with a heart already bruised by life, and blood that would change everything. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet heroes who step forward when the world is looking away, please take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel Kindness Touch. Your support helps stories like this reach the hearts they're meant to find. By noon, sunlight poured through the atrium windows of Meridian Medical Center, turning the polished floors into mirrors. Alina Moreau, 41, founder and CEO of a logistics empire that stitched continents together, had been rushed in that morning after collapsing during a quarterly briefing. Headlines had already been drafted in the minds of journalists: relentless leader pushed too far, another titan felled by pressure. The truth was more fragile and more human. A rare blood disorder had flared without warning, and the treatment required an immediate transfusion of a type so uncommon it made the blood bank screens blink red. Calls went out. Couriers were dispatched. Time slipped like sand through fingers. Across town, in a sunlit community center that smelled faintly of disinfectant and crayons, Jonah Reyes was waiting for his son's therapy session to end. At 36, Jonah had learned the art of waiting for buses, for callbacks that never came, for the tightness in his chest to ease after a double shift. Since his wife's death 3 years earlier, daytime was a careful choreography of school drop-offs, temp jobs, and appointments that kept his 7-year-old Mateo steady and smiling. Jonah's phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. He almost always did. But something nudged him, a quiet insistence that felt like sunlight on the back of his neck. The voice on the other end spoke fast and careful, explaining the shortage, the urgency, the blood type. Jonah carried like a footnote on his medical chart. He thought of his son's backpack by his feet, the superhero patch sewn on crookedly. He thought of rent due next week. He thought of the way daylight looked when it fell just right on a hospital window. Jonah said yes before fear could argue him down. He asked only if Mateo could come with him, because there was no one else to watch him. The answer was yes. Meridian Medical Center received them with the brisk kindness reserved for emergencies. Badges were printed. Consent forms were signed. Mateo sat with his legs swinging, tracing shapes on the floor with the toe of his sneaker. Jonah rolled up his sleeve under a wash of bright light and felt the needle's brief sting, the steady pull that made him breathe deeper. He closed his eyes and imagined a stranger on the other side of the wall, someone whose life was unraveling while his blood traveled clear tubing like a promise. He didn't know her name. He didn't need to. Upstairs, Alina's world was narrowing to beeps and breath. Her mind flickered through memories not of deals won, but of mornings she had skipped breakfast to make flights, of weekends sacrificed to ambition, of a childhood apartment where sunlight warmed a kitchen table she rarely saw anymore. When the transfusion began, it was as if color returned to a photograph. Her pulse steadied. The monitors eased their sharp insistence. The attending physician exhaled. They would never put Jonah's name in the report, but his blood threaded itself into Alina's veins, rewriting the ending everyone had assumed. By late afternoon, the crisis had passed. The city outside hummed in full daylight, unaware of the hinge it had just turned on. Jonah was offered a meal voucher and a handshake that lingered, and he left with Mateo, whose grin stretched wide when a volunteer handed him a sticker shaped like a sun. On the bus ride home, Jonah felt lightheaded and proud, an odd pairing he would remember for years. He did not imagine that the woman he had saved would be asking for him by name. Alina woke to afternoon light slanting across the room, the kind that softened edges. Gratitude arrived first, then curiosity. She asked questions until the staff smiled at her persistence. A single dad, a community center, a willingness that arrived without fanfare. Alina had spent her life rewarding speed and certainty. This was different. This was a quiet courage that made room for others. She asked if she could meet him. Protocols complicated things, but daylight is persuasive, and so is a CEO who has just been handed her life back. They met in a hospital garden where marigolds leaned toward the sun. Jonah stood awkwardly, unsure where to put his hands, Matteo hiding behind his leg before peeking out with solemn eyes. Alina took in the scuffed shoes, the careful posture of a man who has learned to take up as little space as possible. She felt a pull she could not name, a recognition that felt older than memory. There were no grand speeches, just a shared understanding that something irreversible had occurred between them. Gratitude thickened the air, not heavy but alive. Days passed into weeks, and the daylight kept showing up for them. Alina recovered with a discipline she had once reserved for work, now redirected toward living. Jonah returned to his routines, but something had shifted. A handwritten note arrived at his apartment with a voucher for groceries and a thank you that did not condescend. Then an invitation to lunch at a cafe bathed in sun, where Alina listened more than she spoke, absorbing Jonah's stories of midnight fevers and morning triumphs, of Matteo's love for drawing cities where buses always arrived on time. Alina began to see the world she had missed. She visited the community center during daytime hours, funding programs without branding them with her name. She watched Jonah kneel to tie Matteo's laces and felt a tenderness that startled her. In boardrooms flooded with light, she asked different questions now, about people and pace, about leaving room for lives that did not look like hers. Jonah, in turn, learned to accept help without feeling small, to let sunlight land on his plans for the future. Suspense didn't vanish. It transformed. The challenge was no longer survival, but trust. Alina had built walls of glass and steel. Jonah had learned to brace for loss. Day by day, they practiced honesty in the open air. They took Matteo to the park at noon, where shadows were short and laughter carried. Alina discovered joy in small rituals, like packing lunches, like watching Matteo present a drawing with the seriousness of a gift. Jonah discovered that his steadiness was not invisible, that it could be seen and valued. When a reporter finally connected the dots, the story tried to become something else. Savior meets billionaire, charity romance. Alina refused the framing in a statement released at midday, crediting a community that teaches kindness as a muscle strengthened by use. She insisted that Jonah's privacy be respected. Jonah read the article during a lunch break and felt seen without being exposed, a rare kindness in a loud world. The true test came when Alina faced a board vote that would decide whether she could slow the company's relentless expansion in favor of sustainable hours and humane policies. It was a risk in broad daylight, with numbers projected and eyes narrowed. Jonah sat in the back, Matteo coloring quietly beside him. Alina spoke of resilience, of unseen heroes, of the way a single act can reroute a life. The vote passed by one. Outside sunlight broke through a passing cloud, and Alina laughed, a sound that felt like a beginning. Near the end of summer, in the long afternoons when the day seems to stretch its arms, Alina and Jonah stood on the steps of the community center as Matteo ran ahead, chasing the light. Alina understood then that love had arrived not with fireworks, but with consistency, with the choice to show up when it mattered. Jonah understood that his kindness had not only saved a life, but had opened his own. If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you that ordinary people can change the course of extraordinary lives, please engage with this video. Your likes, shares, and comments tell us these stories matter and help kindness travel further than we ever could alone.